Okay, so we will wait a couple of minutes more that the others will join, and then we can start the webinar of today, the happy hour. I hope you all already have a drink next to you. Drinks, the happy hour, they're not for free, but hopefully you acquired a good drink. I have some water myself. Some tea. I see some tea. And in the meantime, I can already say what the NRIN, the Netherlands Research Integrity Network, is doing. Every second Thursday of the month, we have the happy hour that we discuss all types of topics and presentations related to research integrity, research ethics, responsible conduct of research, and many more topics. Mainly meta research, of course, because that's what the Netherlands Research Integrity Network is all about. Well, you're always happy to join. In the meantime, I also can say that we have a symposium coming up in 2.5 weeks' time, the 25th of October. Please check out the websites of the NRIN. We have a wonderful set of speakers that will share their thoughts on different aspects of research integrity. It's in Utrecht. It's a live session, and hereby I'm inviting every one of you. And in the meantime, we have passed a couple of minutes, and I'm super happy to start the webinar. I will stop sharing my screen right now, and would like to hand over the word to Michiel de Boer. But first, I would like to introduce him. Michiel de Boer is an associate professor of epidemiology at the Department of Primary and Long-Term Care at the University Medical Center in Groningen, which is in the north of the Netherlands. And he is also the chair of the Dutch Reproducibility Network, one of the strongholds that are shaping the reproducibility network here in the Netherlands. He reached his PhD at the EMGO Institute, which is an epidemiology institute, in 2004, and he continued his work as an associate professor at the VU University in Amsterdam, where he was the director of the Master of Health Sciences. And there he studied the use and the misuse of null hypothesis significance testing. Very interesting work. I definitely recommend you to read that one. It's fascinating how different perspectives are on this, on the use and misuse of null hypothesis significance testing. And now he is focused more on evidence-based methods and interpretation of scholarly research. And today we'll talk about the progress about the Dutch Reproducibility Network. Very happy to have you here. Normally, just for all the participants, very short. The format is 20 to 30 minutes of presentation. Then we have 10 minutes of a respondent who is asking very difficult questions to Michiel, and then we open up the floor to everyone. And please, if you have a question, please put it in the chat so I also know that you have a question, and I will give you the word by then. So Michiel, after this introduction, the floor is yours.
Wow, Jori, many thanks for that. Well, and thanks for inviting me to share some thoughts on reproducibility and especially the replication crisis. I'm going to try to share my screen, if that works. Let's see how I should do this. I usually don't work in Zoom, so but I'll try some. Oh yeah, of course, that's why this. Sorry, let me see if this works.
There is a button in the
yeah. I found the button. I just need to see which share I need to and how to get my presentation. I'm working with multiple screens here. You can't see my screen, I think, yet. Is it visible?
Sorry, not yet.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Oh, great. And do I have it in presentation mode now?
Not yet.
Okay. This is interesting. Sorry for this. Let's see. How do I get this here? Sorry for this.
Sometimes it helps to first put it in presentation mode and then share screen so it's already on.
Yeah.
That works.
It is. I'm gonna retry it now. This should work. Is this better? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're there. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Now the only thing is that I need to see how I can jump from slide to slide. Let's see. Because this is a nice slide, but I'd like to show some more. Why is this not working? Okay. Now you see another slide.
Now we're on the next slides.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we
just not reacting.
You got this.
Okay, good. Sorry for that. But we'll start now. Are we in a replication crisis? That's the central question. But of course, I also will tell something about the reproducibility network in the Netherlands and how we see this. So today I'm gonna split myself up in sort of a Hyde and Jekyll. Part one is about we are in a replication crisis. So I'm going to make the case that we are in a crisis. And in the second part, I'm going to make the case that we're actually not in a crisis and what that means. Okay, so we are in a replication crisis. The word replication crisis emerged somewhere apparently in the beginning 2010s, so somewhere around 2010 or 2012. And then when this paper came out, and many of you might know it, estimating the reproducibility of psychological science, the word really, well, went viral, you could say. So I think many people, especially in psychology, talked about the replication crisis, but also in other disciplines. And in this study, they looked at 100 experimental and correlational studies, which were published earlier, and they tried to replicate the findings of these studies. And if you look at the main results that they showed, that's this picture. What you see here is the original effect sizes on the x-axis and the replication effect sizes on the y-axis, and what you see is that is actually a couple of things. All of these, or almost all of these 100 studies, originally showed statistically significant results, whereas in the replication you see a lot of these study results, which are the circles. that are not statistically significant, so orange. And what you also see, and that's even, I think, more important and more striking, is that almost all of the effect sizes in the replication studies were smaller than those of the original studies. And so it depends a little bit on your definition of replication success, but the authors of this paper estimated that around 40% of the study results actually replicated. So that means 60% not, and that's why we're in a crisis. At least that was what they said. Now, you could think that maybe this is something that's inherent to psychology, but in the meantime, there have been quite some studies that also have looked at replication in other disciplines, and one that I really like is this one. Investigated the replicability of preclinical cancer biology studies. Was done by Timothy Ehret and colleagues from the Center of Open Science. And they wrote 2 papers about this, and I really like especially the second paper, which talks about challenges for assessing replicability in preclinical cancer biology. But I'll show a little bit about both papers, the results from these. And so these are the results of the replications they did. And so they actually they ended up using 23 papers. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, on 50 experiments, looking at 158 effects. So within these experiments, the researchers looked at different effects, usually multiple effects, and on a bit more, even on a bit more outcomes. And you can see that if you look, for instance, at the effects, they looked at a couple of ways you can look at replication. So one of the definitions they used is whenever the effect is in the same direction, we use it, or we call it a successful replication. And that happened in almost 80% of the effects. And so it also means that in more than 20% of the effects, the effect was not even in the same direction. And you could also say, well, we'll look at direction and statistical significance. And if you look at that, it's of course a more stringent criterion, and only 43% of the study showed a replication success. You can also say maybe we'll look at whether the original effect size is in the confidence interval of the replication effect size. That only happened in 18% of the studies, or the other way around, which was a bit more than 43%. And there were a couple of other definitions that they also used. And one of which was, and that's I think also very striking, the replication effect size, whether that was larger or not than the original effect size. And that's almost at the bottom here, and that happened in only 3% of the cases. So in the overwhelming number of effects here, the original effect size was actually larger than the replication effect size. Okay, so that's somewhat actually similar as what we saw in the psychology study. So this is not something that's inherent to psychology alone. This happens across disciplines, and I'll show a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. Now, the other thing that they showed in the other paper was, I think, even more striking, and that's this picture. What they actually wanted to do is they wanted to replicate 193 experiments. So they started their replication study, by trying to replicate 193 experiments. And what they needed was shared data, and they needed, of course, details on the analysis from the reports or from the studies. They needed sometimes the code to be shared. In this case, because it's preclinical studies, they needed reagents. Sometimes they needed protocol clarifications, and of course they wanted authors to assist them in that. And here you see in what percentage of the time that was actually done. And you see that in many cases, they didn't have either the code that wasn't shared, or the data, or the authors didn't help at all, or there were no reagents offered, etc., etc. And that meant that they could only initiate 87 experiments, and there were other barriers which they encountered during at their study, and in the end they were only able to complete 50 experiments. So that's a little over 25% of the experiments that they actually wanted to replicate. They were only able to do that with 50. And so that in itself is, of course, maybe you could say, a result that shows that we're really in a replication crisis. Now, as I said, there are also replication studies in other domains. And in this study by Kobe et al., they looked at different disciplines. So they looked at the biomedical discipline, which we showed an example of, the psychology domain, which I showed an example of, but also in economics and education and health sciences, or other, a mixture of two or more. And they here you see a couple of characteristics of these replication studies. So, for instance, did the replication study team specify that they contacted the original study project team? So you can imagine that if you do that, replicating a result becomes hopefully easier, because if that project team collaborates with you, you will have more details that you can use, or data or whatever. Does it refer to a protocol that was registered, etc.? So here are a couple of the characteristics that influence whether you, or to what extent you will be able to reproduce a study and to replicate the results. And of course, they also had some results. So that's given in this table. And I think for now, it's, I think, most interesting to look at this row here based on the author's definition of reproducibility. Did the study replicate? And if you look at that, it's quite diverse. What you see percentage-wise, psychology doesn't fare too well here. Health sciences seems to fare better, but that might also have to do with some of the characteristics of these studies, and maybe their definition of reproducibility or replication success. And then there's a couple of other disciplines where the number of studies are not that large, so it's quite difficult to weigh these percentages against each other. In all, you can say that there are problems in most fields, and so it might very well be, or you might very well state that we are across disciplines in a replication crisis. Now, part two, there's no replication crisis. So I'm now going to shift to another personality and try to explain why we're actually not in a replication crisis. And the first reason is actually quite simple. If you look at the term crisis, and this is just from a web dictionary, Collins Dictionary, it says that it's a crucial stage or turning point, unstable period, a sudden change. And so what you see in all of these definitions is that it evolves around a certain point in time. And I actually don't believe that that is what's going on in research or in science. Many of the studies that were replicated in the psychology project were not studies that were done 5 years ago or 2 years ago, but were done maybe 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So we're not in a crisis in the sense that it's just this moment. I think this has been going on for much longer. And I think framing it as a crisis, as we're in a moment of crisis, that's just not right. Now, there's also, I think, the fact that there are reasons why studies do not replicate, and I think a couple of are very logical or simple. And many of the studies were underpowered, I think, that were included in the replication studies. And you might say, well, that isn't that an aspect of the crisis that we're in? And of course, you could say, yeah, that's not good if studies are underpowered. On the other hand, this is something we knew for a long time already, and that most of the studies we do or did are underpowered. So this is not something new. I think another point that you should take into account is that we really would not expect every study to replicate, because it's really hard to do a study a second time in exactly the same way under exactly the same circumstances. Only by time evolving, circumstances will change, and that might influence the results in itself. So we would never expect every study or every study effect to replicate. And that's just simply not feasible. That will never happen. And maybe sometimes also validity issues will play a role. And if you can imagine that in a replication study, the researchers performing that study will be very stringent in following the protocol, even more so than the original authors, and that might also influence the validity of those studies or the study results, which might be different between replication and original study. And so I think there are a couple of reasons why we wouldn't expect every study to replicate. And even if power is 80%, which is totally acceptable by most of us, then a number of studies will not replicate by definition or study effects. Okay, and then finally, I don't think it's very fruitful to talk about a reproducibility crisis. And there's a couple of groups of authors that have, I think, made this clear very nicely, or stated that very nicely. So, for instance, in this paper on the reproducibility debate, it should be seen as an opportunity, not a crisis. They say, in our view, the reproducibility crisis narrative can be unhelpful, in part because it implies an acute situation that can be resolved. That's what I also talked about. Whereas a framework for continuous improvement will be necessary and ultimately more effective to ensure a healthy research culture. So it's about framing it in a more positive way. And they also say in their conclusion, rather than viewing the current debate around reproducibility and replicability of research findings as a crisis, it's much more constructive in our view to frame it as an opportunity to reflect on which aspects of relevant working practices continue to be effective, which can be improved, and which new ways of working can beneficially be introduced into the research ecosystem. And so, rather than looking at it as something that's really bad, it's maybe better or more constructive to see it as an opportunity to continuously improve the research that we're doing. Now, and then I think another group of authors have taken sort of that same approach. They talk about the credibility revolution, and maybe some of you know the Ford organization, and so the authors are affiliated with Ford. You can see the nice picture in the middle of this figure. They talk about modes of change that are already going on. Then they talk about structural changes, for instance, open science in curricula, about procedural changes, for instance, that we now have multiverse analysis, which is the method of analysis that takes different approaches and also compares the outcomes of all these different approaches to make the outcomes more robust. And also community changes, for instance, adversarial collaboration, such as the red teams that have been used, in different disciplines. So they say there are changes going on at different levels, and these changes actually achieve better science. And I think when you look at the Dutch landscape, that's also what we see. So there are loads of initiatives in the Netherlands going on. We have Open Science NL now that also focuses partly on reproducibility. We have a strong open science community Netherlands organization with open science communities in every university city. There are thematic digital competence centers. There are organizations like DANS, where you can store your data, and SERV that work on infrastructure, the eScience Center that works on reproducible software, and then there's this national coordination point of research data management, and loads more going on. So I think we're, if you look at that, we're in a good spot. We're actually in a spot where loads of things are happening that that are good, that increase or can increase support reproducibility, and what we try to do within the reproducibility networks, and now I come to the reproducibility network in the Netherlands, is to coordinate all these initiatives. So we are a steering group of now 6 people with an advisory board, and we try to coordinate work that's being done in research performing institutions, so like the universities and the universities of applied sciences, for instance, but also your organizations like TNO, in external organizations like organizations that I mentioned before, SERV or DANS, or also the funder organizations, and then to also relate these to the local initiatives like the open science communities, but also the Promovendi network in the Netherlands, and those sorts of organizations that are more bottom up. And by coordinating all the initiatives that are there, or trying to do that, we hope to be more efficient in the Netherlands and also more effective in increasing reproducible work. Now, up until now, we have a couple of members and allied initiatives. And so among our members are a couple of universities, as you can see, also the eScience Center that I talked about earlier. And in the allied initiatives, for instance, is NRIN, which hosts this webinar, but also SERV and DANS, which I mentioned before. There are European reproducibility projects that we are collaborating with, etc. So we try to have these members and stakeholders within our network, and together work towards more reproducible workflows and more replicable findings. Now, there's a couple of statements that we've brought out, one together with the open science community in the Netherlands, about what we do together, how we collaborate, but also what our own defining features are, because of course OSCANL is a little bit different than NLRN. We also worked and work with international reproducibility networks, and we released a statement there about what national reproducibility networks are, how they should be seen, what they should do. So that's also maybe interesting to have a look at. And we define some focus areas, and there's actually 4 focus areas depicted in 3 pictures here. So one of the focus areas is to provide information to people who want to start working reproducibly. So we'll try to work on that, to provide information and training materials. There is loads out there, but it needs to be a little bit more directed or curated and made available. And we'll try to do that through our own website. One thing we also would like to focus on is working for and with the non-quantitative sciences. So this is meant to depict a focus group. Focus group is, of course, much different than quantitative methods. And in different ways, that means that we should look at reproducibility or replicability maybe in different ways. And we would also like to focus on that. And then this picture on the right stands for working together. And that's actually two focus areas. What we would like to focus on is work together with meta scientists, because we think it's really important to have an evidence base for what we do. I think for a large part that's still lacking where it comes to reproducible working, how we should do that, what kind of interventions work, which don't. And also what we've seen in the time that we've been active so far is that there's sort of a disconnect still between people working in what we call support staff, so like data management, software engineers, people like that, on the one hand, and researchers on the other hand. So we would also like to bring these people more together and let them work more collaboratively and more efficient. Because there's actually, I think there's a lot of support out there, but it's being underused, and people cannot always find each other. So that's the things that we would like to focus on. There's a couple of activities we're doing. We organize symposia. Our next symposium is the 6th of December. So if you're interested in that, please visit our website. We also are active in what is called code checks. So those are events in which the code, so the software code of studies is being checked. So first authors, researchers offer that to a code check event, and then others try to reproduce the same results with that code. And sometimes you see that doesn't work. So some mistakes are found and retrieved. So that's very helpful. Some of those are still also going on.
Are you almost done, Michiel?
I'm almost done. Yeah, I'm almost done. Yeah. And then I think, as I alluded to, we need evidence-based practices, and there might be some hope because, as I said earlier, there are European studies going on at the moment that are working on an evidence base for reproducibility, and also a couple of other studies, and this one was, I think, very hopeful. It said high replicability of newly discovered social behavioral findings is achievable. What they did, in short, is that they had a couple of labs in psychology replicate each other's studies, and I'm not gonna delve into the studies or the results too much, but I'll show them to you shortly. They're in this right-hand figure. What you can see, I think, if you look very quickly, is that most of these dots, which are original and replication findings, are sort of in the same direction, much more than we saw before in the replication studies. And this happened in a study where all studies were pre-registered, where the sample size of all studies was large enough, where all the methods were shared, and where authors were responsive to additional queries from the other labs. So in short, they said, well, it is possible. If we do research right, we can make it replicable. One caveat, I saw, I think last week or the week before, that this study was actually retracted, which is of course not a good sign. And there are some problems with the pre-registration. Apparently, this study, this replication study, was pre-registered for another aim, not actually to replicate, but to look at a waning effect over time. And now the authors have been given the opportunity to submit a new version of the article. So we have to wait and see how that will come out. So that's maybe not so good news, but I think all in all, I'm very hopeful for what the future will bring us, all the initiatives and all the studies that are underway. So in my summary, I think we're not in a replication crisis, but we are seizing the opportunity to work on reproducible research, and I hope we will continue to do so. With that, I'll give the word back to Yuri.
Yes,